Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Gosztola, and welcome to another edition of the Dissenter Weekly. It is May 20th, 2021. And before we get going on our whistleblower stories for this week, I am joined by Brian, publishing editor for Shadowproof, who has some things for you before we get started.
Hey, Kevin. Thanks for this again this week, and thanks for everybody joining us. Just your reminder to make sure that you're following us wherever you're watching so that you can keep up with this show every week, as well as the stories that we publish at Shadowproof. And if you want to support us, we are 100% reader funded. You can donate at YouTube if that's where you're watching right now, or you can go to shadowproof.com/donate, and there's a variety of options there. And Kevin has his newsletter, which we will probably discuss at the end of this conversation today. But before we get to that, let's dive into our first story here. We have, following whistleblower allegations, DHS ends contracts with 2 ICE detention facilities. I saw this story just moments before hopping on here, so why don't you walk us through it?
Yeah, as you're saying, this is breaking news. Often what we cover isn't breaking news. I got a nice little write-up that I found from the Whistleblower Network news site, and they sum all of this up. But what's happening here is Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas sent a memo to ICE ordering the termination of a contract with the Bristol County Sheriff's Office in North Dartmouth, Massachusetts. He also ordered ICE to quit using the Irwin County Detention Center in Ocilla, Georgia. Now, that story in Georgia was a huge story last year. In September, the Irwin County Detention Center received all this attention because it was widely reported that a whistleblower had accused a gynecologist of performing unnecessary procedures, including hysterectomies, on detained women. From the Whistleblower Network news, they have this little summary. Dawn Wooten, a nurse who worked at the facility, and other whistleblowers at the facility were they alleged that this detention facility was not taking proper COVID-19 precautions to protect detainees and staff, and then also that there were a high rate of hysterectomies being performed on immigrant women at the facility, that in some cases the women seemed to be unclear as to why they received the procedure. And that actually kind of meshes with the story we ran on Shadowproof in California about forced sterilizations. So the Detention Watch Network lauded the development in Georgia, saying the announcement signals a major win for people who've been detained at the facility and have bravely spoken out against the abuses they've experienced, and also for organizations in Georgia that have long fought to shut it down. And they claim that this is the first time ICE has cut a contract for a detention center in recent years. Probably true. I don't know how long that time frame is, but we know nothing like this was happening under Donald Trump. They may be applying this to Obama's administration. I don't know. As for the facility in Massachusetts, that facility was under investigation for excessive force against detainees. News media reported that flashbang grenades, pepper ball launchers, and canines were deployed against detainees in May 2020. This happened when detainees refused to go to the detention center's medical unit for COVID-19 testing. And then there's a little nugget here. You know, there's always something about this story. Like, it feels like a victory, and then there's always something that's tucked in that makes you see that this might be more about convenience and taking advantage of making us feel like we just won a victory so that they can proceed forward with business as usual. And apparently an anonymous Homeland Security official told the Washington Post that federal officials chose these 2 detention centers mainly because their detention rosters have shrunk and they are no longer operationally necessary. And so it doesn't mean that other facilities aren't going to have these issues. it doesn't mean that other detention facilities won't have whistleblowers coming forward to describe what's happening. We're led to believe this is kind of like from the framework of a few bad apples. And even Mayorkas, his pronouncements make it seem like, he is enforcing a standard here, like there is humane detention within these ICE facilities. So I think we should applaud, because this would not have happened without pressure. There were 5 or 6 facilities that the ACLU and other groups want shut down. They picked these 2 because they've already cleared them out, and it's easy for the administration to make it seem like they're on the right side of progressives.
Thank you, Kevin. Very important story, and I totally agree on, what you were saying about sort of, hedging this news a little bit and putting in context. So really appreciate that.
Nonetheless, we are glad that those facilities are shut down. I do not take away from that. I just
absolutely not.
But if you're playing along at home, you would put this in the category of things like, we will cut off our offensive cooperation with Saudi Arabia when it comes to Yemen. It'll just be defensive, or those things that they have done to make it seem like, we're going to waive the patents on the vaccines. What's that going to look like? Well, we don't know, but we're just going to tell you we agree in our hearts with that sentiment. It's just like they're getting savvy, and I just want to make that clear.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Let's go on to our next story here. We have in Croatia, the Supreme Court upholds the extradition request against British oil industry whistleblower. Catch us up on this story.
So this is an update, and we covered Jonathan Taylor a few shows ago. In July 2020, he was arrested in Croatia after an Interpol red license from Monaco. It was on bribery and corruption charges that were issued, or an investigation into bribery and corruption charges. He's a British whistleblower who provided evidence against the Dutch oil firm SBM Offshore in 2012, which employed him. The Index on Censorship summarized that Taylor exposed a, quote, multi-million-dollar network of bribery payments made by SBM around the world, and cooperated with prosecutors in the UK, the US, Brazil, and the Netherlands. These investigations resulted in fines against the company to the tune of $827 million, and the conviction of 2 former CEOs of SBM for fraud-related offenses. But Monaco is targeting him, and he's been unable to leave Croatia since he was arrested in July of 2020, as I mentioned at the top there. And the UK is refusing to intervene to protect him from this attack. He has urged the Croatian Ministry of Justice to, quote, ensure EU directives on the protection of whistleblowers are adhered to, and that he would be returned home. An open letter was written in support of him to the Justice Ministry to urge that they simply refuse Monaco's request. It's something that the government has the ability to do. They do not have to follow this Supreme Court decision. The letter states, quote, Monaco to date has failed to initiate a single criminal investigation into highly credible and well-documented allegations of bribery and corruption on the part of SBM Offshore. Instead, it is targeted the one person who blew the whistle and brought public scrutiny to such widespread financial crimes. You might recall that when we talked about Jonathan a few shows ago, it was on the fact that police came to his home and took him to a hospital against his will, and he was there overnight, and that was highly bizarre, if not very punitive. And eventually he was released, but it just had nothing to do with his well-being. It seemed to be a move to make it clear how much authority these security forces could have over him within Croatia. He's been outspoken and resisting what they're trying to do. It's not bringing positive press to the country that he is challenging his treatment, and the fact that they are ready to hand him over to Monaco. And so This is a crucial story. The Index on Censorship, this organization that sticks up for whistleblowers and freedom of expression, has defended Jonathan Taylor in recent months. And so I put this at the top of the list of cases that we should keep track of, because this calls into question very much one, Croatia's commitment to any kind of whistleblowing or any kind of whistleblower protections. It raises a lot of questions about Monaco. It also, again, suggests that the UK is not doing enough to protect its citizens. So we'll stay on top of this story here at the Dissenter Weekly.
Next up, we have what seems like an extremely disturbing story. A whistleblower has indicated that a healthcare company in New York is allegedly diluting their Pfizer COVID vaccines. What is this story?
Yeah, and I'll stress that we have an allegation, and I don't know exactly the extent of what's happening, but I'll take this to be a credible allegation for the time being. But I just caveat it because we're talking about vaccines, and you got to be really careful here about what is said about what's going on with the vaccine. There's no allegation that this has nothing to do with suggesting the vaccine wasn't effective. What Andrew Palazzo, this whistleblower, is alleging is that 16,000 Pfizer doses could have been over diluted and administered at Korean Community Services vaccination site in Bayside, Queens. That's in New York City. And so this story comes from, I'm reading from a CBS New York local news report. And Palazzo said, when I was the lead vaccinator, I was instructed to have everybody do the over diluting. And he was asked if it was direct from the CEO. He said, correct. I assumed he was the higher medical authority. I thought it was okay. He was fired. He filed a lawsuit against his employer, which is actually called Centers Urgent Care. That's not Korean Community Services. So that must be the firm that manages this location. And Palazzo alleges while he worked at this site from the end of March until May, the CEO, Scott Orlansky, told him to utilize between 1.9 milliliters and 2.0 milliliters of diluent per vial to obtain at least 7 doses. And this is of the Pfizer COVID vaccine. According to CDC guidelines, 1.8 milliliters is to be used. Do not add more than 1.8 milliliters of diluent is basically the guideline from the Food and Drug Administration. According to Pfizer, after dilution, COVID-19 vaccine vials contain 5 to 6 doses. So you could do this to stretch the supply and expand what you have available to use, but you would be diminishing the effectiveness of the vaccine. Quite clearly, it would not be as good for people who you were injecting this into. And so I don't know where this is going to go. There's a lawsuit now. It involves retaliation. He's going to claim that he was fired baselessly, probably for challenging the way they were managing these vaccines. So we'll stay on top of any important developments that may come out of the story. It caught my attention. It seems important. I had not heard that this was happening, but I guess it's not unusual to read that in the areas of the United States with more concentrated populations that there might be some firms that were trying to stretch their supplies, especially in the immediate when they weren't sure what kind of supply they were going to have.
Thanks for that, Kevin. We're going to move over now to Oregon, where whistleblowers are challenging haphazard tree cutting. What have you found here?
Yes, so the tree cutting that we are talking about here comes after forest fires. There are contractors for the Oregon Department of Transportation who go through areas and they mark the trees for cutting. It's supposed to protect safety. However, whistleblowers reveal that the removal of trees is pretty haphazard. The trees are hastily marked with little method to their selection, which suggests that excessive tree cutting is occurring so that the contractors could make more money. from the Oregon Public Broadcasting, from their website, we have that Eric Phillips is one of several whistleblowers who told lawmakers in the state about problems he saw while working for a contractor on Highway 224. It was a very hurry up, let's get trees cut and cut as many trees as we can, Phillips said in a recent legislative hearing. There's so much mismanagement, so much lack of accountability. It's like people just want to get paid. He said workers with no arborist experience were marking trees for removal, that he saw contractors falling trees into wetlands and cutting trees that weren't marked as hazardous, and that he didn't see anyone making sure the rules were followed. There's no oversight out there in the field at all. So this is something that I think goes along well with the whistleblower stories we've been following out of Colorado related to the Air Pollution Control Division. You have these state agencies that are supposed to regulate their environment. If you don't have industry capture, then you have at least this profit motive where it looks like the contractors are exploiting their arrangement with the state agency to basically bilk taxpayers out of funds. So to drive up the cost of dealing with these trees after forest fires, which is easy. I mean, I don't know, unless you actually have someone who comes from the state agency who can go out there to those trees and look at them one by one. I don't know if they're going to be checking the work of the contractor. You mostly would take them at their word that they're cutting down the trees that need to be cut. So my cat is visiting our show, as she likes to do. We'll probably be returning in just a moment, and maybe when I'm not in the middle of presenting a segment, I'll show her off to everyone because she is cute, but not so cute when I'm trying to do this show. So we have one more story here.
Yes, let's talk about Julian Assange here. We have a China official invokes Assange case to deflect criticism from the United States. What is this story here?
Yeah. So this story is one that I know is from last week or maybe even 2 weeks ago. I think it's important for us to talk about. And excuse me. Come here. Hello, everyone. This is JoJo, and you can sit with me and stop causing terror. I am going to go back to doing the story. So, and this is from a Chinese official who is actually part of the foreign ministry and was asked by the China News Service. Some U.S. officials recently accused the Chinese government of using state media and their platforms to engage in propaganda and spread disinformation overseas in an attempt to disrupt and undermine democracy while restricting freedom of press and speech at home. Do you have any comment? And to that, this official, whose name is Hua Chunying, some in the U.S., she said, in the name of freedom of press and speech, wantonly smear and attack China. This, in itself, is spreading disinformation and a travesty of real freedom and democracy. If they are truly defending freedom, why won't they allow others to tell the truth when they are making up lies to confuse public opinion? If they are truly defending freedom, why is it that Mr. Assange, founder of WikiLeaks, was thrown in prison after being forced to shelter in the Ecuadorian embassy in London for 7 years? And then it continues on. Why won't they tolerate the existence of other civilizations and systems, and on, plucking out things that they can use to shame the United States and undercut their own criticisms of China. So I bring this up because I knew this was coming, that Assange would be weaponized in what we are calling, or the wonks in foreign policy are calling, great power competition. Our own military agencies, national security agencies call it, they call it great power competition. And there are wars between powerful countries, and the dissidents that are targeted by China are weaponized and raised in order to shame China. And now we see this dissident journalist, Julian Assange, who absolutely should not have this political case brought against him. It's being brought up by officials in China. And we know that Azerbaijan, which has a really bad record on press freedom, that the leader of that country invoked Assange in an interview with BBC News when he was asked about his country and raised the treatment that how the UK has treated, why the UK hasn't allowed Julian Assange to go free. And so this is something where it's just worth pointing out. It's hard to unravel, and I'm not necessarily saying what's right or wrong here. I think this presents a challenge to people who are supporters of Assange and are trying to do the right thing, because now the easy way to smear efforts, if you saw a sudden eruption of support for Julian Assange, you could easily imagine the State Department or some other agency accusing Chinese bots of being behind that and suggesting that it's not organic that people are outraged about Assange. So I simply bring this up to say that on one hand, it is affecting the soft power of the United States. It's affecting the way the U.S. speaks about human rights and how they are treated as credible messengers, whether they're believed that they actually care about freedom and human rights. But I don't care about that as much as I do the fact that when these officials in countries that the U.S. has on official enemies lists, or people who they deem as having very authoritarian records on human rights, when they invoke Assange, it puts us in a really bad situation when it comes to trying to protect human rights and freedom in the world. And so, nothing specific was really raised that had any evidence related to whatever China is or is not doing. But you can imagine they are doing what the United States does, and this tit for tat, I think, really puts us all at risk.
Thank you, Kevin. Why don't you tell us a little bit about this last thing you got here queued up, and I'll bring over this here. Do you want to set this up for people a little bit?
Okay, sure. I was putting together the show, and I came across a post that has a summary of this recent episode of this show that is on CBS. It's called S.W.A.T. It's a remake. It's a police drama, and there's not much to say. I will riff on it, and you can join with me. But I thought a lighthearted way to end this show. We usually have pretty heavy topics, but something to just show how some of these things that we really care about are leaking into our entertainment. I mean, you'll notice talking points that have come from a good place make their way into this clip, but then you'll also see some of why I find this to be kind of hokey and strange. So please play the clip.
All right, just tell me when to stop. All right.
And yeah, you got the volume selected, right? So it'll play.
Yeah, I hope so. Let me know if you can't hear it. Here we go.
He will not be fired from the LAPD. Same for the other two, Gibson and Ellis. They'll all be placed on probation and reassigned to other divisions.
That's final. What about the recording? Or the 3 hours of testimony the deacon gave the board? Sir, he's been catching flack from other officers for turning that tape in. What, it's all just for nothing?
Now, the recording carried weight. It prompted IA's integrity check on Durham and the other officers, but ultimately the board found no tangible evidence that racism influenced their work.
Yeah, why would it? Commander, what about their arrest records? They skew heavily towards people of color.
I hear you, but these officers have all worked with officers of color with no incident. A few even have partners who are people of color.
What, the I got a black friend defense? Come on, man, stop it. What are we supposed to do now?
Well, we just sit here while a pack of racists pick and choose who they're going to arrest each day.
It's a union issue.
The same union that shielded these three from any real punishment in the first place.
Yeah. The same union that's protected both of you in the past. Fair or not, this is the system doing its job, advocating for cops.
Racist cops.
I love it.
Where do you find this stuff? Man, it's a testament to, yeah. I also like how they have like the Christian Bale Batman voice, basically in 3 different variations. But I'm so glad that I don't have cable or whatever.
Isn't that bad? That's
Yeah.
just like really bad. Okay. Okay. First off, can I just make an aesthetic critique, which is that like
Yes.
all the dialogue is exposition. It's like, here's why we're having this conversation.
Yeah.
It's not like, okay, there's this conflict going on, which I would accept. Like in any film or television show, I would accept. You've got these
Yeah.
people you want to root out. They're in your police department. You're going up against people who are going to attack you. We've talked about these issues seriously in police departments, but they're just like, rather than just come bring that to their boss, they're like, this is why it's not working. Why isn't it working? Oh, it's because it's a police union issue.
Yeah.
Just like,
Well, I have to imagine it's got to be hard to like, you have probably like 30 seconds to deliver that scene, in like actual time. You probably have to just not an excuse, but I mean, I guess it kind of points to the fact that like, broaching these subjects in this format while, this is how a lot of people primarily in this country consume, honestly, like I feel like in some ways this is a form of news for people who are watching it and who maybe don't follow like the news very closely, but have a sense of what's going on in the world. It's not, I feel like people will like read headlines and then they watch these shows, and that those two things like gel together to be like, oh, that's what's happening in the world.
it's a rip from the headlines kind of a thing.
Yeah. So I don't know. And I mean, part of me wonders too, especially in this format and probably in the context of like a season or like a run of this show, it kind of just feels like I think you said this when we were setting it up, it's kind of like got that bad apples, good apple, good cop, bad cop kind of vibe, which I think is, obviously just bullshit. So I don't know.
I have this.
What was your reaction?
So first off, I don't know anything about the show. I don't know who these characters are.
Yeah.
I really don't care. But I have to tell you that there's this great recap that was posted by this site, and this is where I found it. It showed up in the Google search. It's the site called celebdirtylaundry.com. I have no idea what this is, but it is a recap of the show. And it says, and like, this is the breakdown. In tonight's SWAT episode, the police union was powerful. They tend to step in whenever an officer is in trouble, and they did so again with Durham and the other two. The raiders weren't being fired. They were instead going to be transferred to different precincts, and so Deacon faced more repercussions than the racists. The racists got to pretend they weren't racist because they used Black Friends defense. First off, like the Black Friends defense thing is like really hilarious to me because it's like, I mean, is this really happening? Are like white cops really not facing punishment because they can say like they get along with black or brown cops in their police agencies? I'm just wondering if this is real because I haven't seen this documented in anything. It seems very convoluted.
I can't point to any examples, but I do feel like I've heard the excuse come from, like the police union president type, would be the kind of person to make that kind of excuse in a press conference. I feel like, like I said, I couldn't point to any examples, but if we're just sort of talking loosely about this, then that definitely sounds like a talking point I've heard. Or like citing the diversity of the, like a lot of times in New York City, they'll cite the diversity of the NYPD, as sort of like a bulwark against this kind of a criticism. So it definitely rings familiar to me.
So the recap continues and says, they mentioned how they worked with black cops, that there was never an issue in the past. Hondo knew that was a joke. He and Deacon both found evidence that 3 racists' arrest reports skew heavily towards people of color. They went around looking for minorities to arrest, and so that should have been proof of their racisms, yet it wasn't. The 3 men will be transferred, and other officers will give Deacon a wide berth because now he's known for investigating other cops. And then it goes on. Holt broke the news to Deacon and Hondo. Neither of the men was happy with the situation. Hondo personally feels like the department should have done more. The least they could do was take back their racist badges and guns, but the police department wasn't going to do that. They were just going to transfer the men and hope everything blows over. Guys, in the meantime, had to do their jobs. It's just like, anyways.
I don't know.
The other thing that's crazy about this show is there's like a sex trafficking thing in here.
Oh, yeah. Sex trafficking. I mean, I think we might have lost Kevin. Oh, no. Let's see if he comes back. Hold on one second. He's coming back in.
Sorry, I closed the wrong window.
Okay. That's okay.
So the other thing is that the there was like a sex worker, which is always rife with like the worst kinds of stereotypes about what happens. So we've got stereotypes about police accountability and whistleblowers, and then we've got like these are people that I think the writers probably have good intentions. So I think it's like good bad. You know what I mean? Like,
Sure.
It's a good bad clip. Like the people behind it believe what they're doing is good. It's the same way. I don't know if you've noticed, Law and Order for the first time is going to go to having a defense attorney show. Like it's not just going to be from the prosecutor's point of view, which it's been all along for its time. Like this is a 25, 30-year-old institution in television. So I don't know, like I think the closing point here, if we're going to say anything substantive about something that like, honestly, I was just playing for the sake of being amused that this is showing up in a program that is largely forgettable. You know, like there's nothing of value to SWAT. If you watch it, you were just probably sitting in a hospital bed waiting to be released from your room because you just, you're out, you're like done with a procedure and you're waiting to be released. At least my opinion. If I ever watch CBS, it's because I'm going to be forced to watch CBS television. And like, that's what's on at the doctor's office, or that's what's on somewhere. Yeah. Like I'm a captive to it. But what I'll say is that like, if there's anything positive to take away from this, it's that like a lot of what we're talking about here on the show, when we talk about police accountability and the whistleblowing, and when you talk about the things that you're seeing with the Black Lives Matter movement, that is like filtering its way into mass entertainment. And that is like a huge deal because what it suggests is that law enforcement is losing its grip on entertainment, which they've had a monopoly over forever, really. Like you go back to the genesis of television and film, for the most part, cops have always had the monopoly over like and I'm not saying that it's going to change, that they're going to, not always have maybe a majority of entertainment is still always, but there might be more parity. You might be able to see more like equality of like, like there's more balance. Like, okay, there's a lot that says that trends toward the cops are bad, let's abolish them, to, hey, cops can do no wrong and we need to empathize with them. I mean, what are the tropes? Like the biggest cop trope is he was a guy who wouldn't play by the rules.
Yeah,
and like,
exactly.
And like we elevate that as like a thing that like we need in order to protect us from violence and stuff like that, and the criminals that are out there. But then what about this new genre that we're seeing, which elevates issues of human rights and accountability into the show? Like seeing characters do that policing, but have to deal with matters of justice and accountability. It's an interesting wrinkle. I don't think it makes the show any less entertaining to me. I mean, as you can see from the episode, it will retain its hokiness. It'll be the same fluffy garbage that it was when the law enforcement agencies had complete control over these characters.
Yeah. I mean, I think an interesting question for something like this is like, I completely agree, and I feel like I do notice that the politics of the moment, and I'm sure this is true of any time, are creeping into entertainment. But I mean, I feel like in the end, what you really need is not for this to be sort of a story arc or like an episode or a series, but like if we're going to really try to portray more accurately law enforcement and entertainment, if that's something we're going to strive to do, then this would seem to me to be, these issues, not this specific scene, but would seem to need to be foundational to the show, right? And again, like I don't watch SWAT, so I have, maybe it is. If any SWAT listener or watchers out there want to correct me, please do cancel me over my misinterpretation of SWAT. But I think I definitely agree with your point, and obviously, just like anything else, it remains to be seen how people consume it. It remains to be seen how law enforcement or people who are sympathetic to law enforcement and so on and so forth might sort of readapt something like that into something that's more favorable to them. Like I think, again, I shouldn't be talking about things that I don't know a whole lot about, but I think that was similar to what happened with the whole Punisher show or movie and the logo, and the way that cops sort of took that up and sort of just got it completely backwards for what the original intention of the show is. So no, I agree with you, and it's definitely it's interesting to see it start to bubble up. And as like writers and producers and so on and so forth, churn with time, and sort of an older guard of writers and so on leave, and a newer generation comes in. I think we'll probably see more of those norms begin to shift. But if there's a constant over the last 150, 200 years of policing in the United States, is that cops always retain the upper hand on the media. And while I don't think that's inevitable and that's something that we can overcome, I'm interested to see sort of how the forces shape this in media over coming years, specifically in entertainment, because these are very challenging and very complicated topics. And I'm always on the fence about how I feel about them being turned into entertainment. I do see the value in it, and I also find problems with it. But in any case, it's fascinating. I can't.
But I think when you understand entertainment, that like the police procedural is like a mainstay of.
It's like what, like 80% of American television.
It's not going to go. It's not going to go away.
No.
So it becomes like a barometer for the culture when you see these things filter into it, and it's I think it is interesting. If for our show, for the Dissenter Weekly, where we're focused on whistleblowers, I both cringe and I'm appreciative when I see whistleblowing stories enter it. There's a show I really enjoy called Damages, and I know there's like mixed ideas about the last season of it, but they had like a Julian Assange character kind of a thing in the show, and they had a storyline where this actor Ryan Philippe played. And Glenn Close was in this show, and I had a pretty good had a lot of politics ripped from the headlines that were like built into this. It's more sophisticated and better show than network television than SWAT. But my point is that like I think like ultimately when you see this happen, you should feel like we're on the right track to some degree. It should almost like validate what we're doing, because you know that like either these forces in entertainment are co-opting this energy, like what we see in the Democratic Party, or these artists are really trying to understand and actually want to like bring this into the stories they tell, so that it's elevated. And I think that's ultimately how you get how we get good films and TV on whistleblowers that are worth talking about on the show. So that's really the last thing I have to say. Yeah. If I'm gonna redeem playing the SWAT clip in our show, that's what I have to say.
And I guess Tom Secker, who's written for us, if you're watching this and you find out that the Department of Justice is funding sort of the way that these shows are being put together, please pitch us that story.
Oh, that would be interesting. Is the Biden administration and their Hollywood connections trying to
woke cop entertainment?
Yeah. And get ahead of it, because you could imagine wanting to have it be like not go too far. Like, hey, we need to make a more mature police procedural, but we don't want to have abolition themes in the shows. We just want to.
Right. You got to let the steam out a little bit. Let the pressure out.
Yeah. All right.
Why
So let's wrap.
why don't you talk about the newsletter and carry us out here?
As it says at the bottom there, the Dissenter newsletter, we went on hiatus about a week ago, almost. Well, actually, this week I announced it, but I have halted the sending of the newsletter out for a couple of weeks. We are migrating to our own space, and this is where we will live. We will get to keep all the revenue that we make. It will go to site hosting fees. We're going to Ghost, and there I'll get the support that I deserve as a content creator. I wasn't getting respect. I wasn't getting the kind of interactions that I believe I deserved as a user of Substack. And so I left, and there's more detail. You can read about it. It's posted to the dissenter.substack.com. The archive of material will live there. Paid posts and free posts will be posted there. I don't know that paid posts will be accessible, but free posts are going to always be there for people to read. It's no longer where you should go to read the Dissenter, but everyone who's a subscriber is going to be sent the first post when this site goes live on June 3rd. And this new iteration of the Dissenter, I'm really excited for it. I will be including more guest contributions from people like Mohammed Almazi, who has who did the Craig Murray report that we covered last week. There will be other people we bring in. We're going to do more with this now. It's not just going to be about me. There are a lot of newsletters out there that are built around a single personality, but I want to get around that. I'm going to start bringing people in who are willing to support the Dissenter as far as subscribers go, and then those subscriptions are going to fund the construction of this newsletter in a way that can support having regular contributors, and that way we can really push these stories and these issues into the conversation, get more attention to these stories, and rise above the partisanship and rise above the national security speak that we see when whistleblower stories happen. So I'm really looking forward to what we're going to do, including the fact that it's going to have branding for this new site, where we're working with the person who set up Shadowproof's design and gave us our logo for Shadowproof. That is going to be great to have. So there's much more that I can do with this site that Substack did not allow, and I'm excited to move on with this. And I hope that you're along for the ride. I'll leave it there. There's not much more to add. I'll be spending the next 7 to 10 days getting everything set for that site, and then we'll just keep right on rolling. There are important stories that we need to stay on top of. The Daniel Hale whistleblower case is in a dark moment because he is in jail right now and awaiting sentencing in July. So there's definitely reporting to be published on that. There's the fact that we're waiting for the appeal in the Assange extradition case, a cross appeal with both sides having their own. And then, okay, so we have a question here. I stopped mid-thought because I saw somebody following along who asked a good question. What do we do if we have a yearly membership? And I'll just state clearly right now in this section of the show, if you're an annual subscriber And if you're a monthly subscriber, you don't have to do anything. The amazing people over at Ghost who are going to be working with me and hosting this site moved everyone from Substack, and it's going to seamlessly continue. The only thing is there's just a 2-week break here while I set everything up, make everything work really well. And, they had to finish the migration. And then we just turn the switch back on, and we just keep right on rolling like we were at Substack. But I think it's going to look better. And I think that it's going to be better for the people who are involved in producing this content. We'll get to keep 10% of the money we raise to fund this journalism, the money we raise through subscriptions. 10% of that will be gained back for us to pay people to write stories. And again, like I said, I really mean it. This is going to be more than just my newsletter. I want it to be. I'm hoping that next year when I'm talking about this newsletter, I can talk about 1 or 2 other people who are regularly working with me on this, because we are able to bring them in on a regular basis. I look to the Daily Poster for inspiration and see what they've been able to do to follow the money journalism on US politics and have a huge impact. And the challenge that I am accepting is to build that kind of an outlet around whistleblower stories. So to say that there's going to be 1 or 2 people with me who are keeping tabs on whistleblower stories and are digging in and investigating and following lawsuits and doing the kind of posting that we need in order for people to understand this, because we truly do have an accountability crisis. The reason why we do this show and follow these stories is because I think that whistleblower stories are really at the core of the rot of our country. Like, the people who are being crushed for raising their voices, those what happens to them tells us what we really have to fix. What they lay down the markers for our struggles. And I have a pretty wide interpretation of what it means to be a whistleblower. It's not just what the government decides. It's not just what the system that has proper channels for whistleblowers to go through determines. It's not just what the Labor Department determines for people who work at their office or in their manufacturing center. So I'm excited for this. And you don't have to do anything. You'll keep receiving this. If you're an annual subscriber, you'll receive the benefits immediately in June with the exclusive content that we have planned. And I promise you, I will make it worth your while if you subscribe. I'm doing the work now to make sure that June and July and August are going to be good months for getting this rolling. I already know what the guest contribution is going to be for the month of June, and I'm excited to share it with you when we get there. So I don't think there's anything else for me to add after that. That was a really good question. So thank you for asking. And I think we can wrap up. Oh, I should say that next week we are going to take the week off. So when we see you again, it will be June 4th. We will have relaunched the newsletter, and we can talk about the success of that. And then we can cover some of the stories we missed, as well as the more recent stories for June. And then we'll be here for much of the summer to cover what's happening in the world of whistleblowers.
Thank you for all of that. I'm really excited too. I've gotten to take some sneak peeks behind the curtain and see how it's all coming together, and it looks really awesome. And not to go on too much of a tangent, but I also think one thing that we've talked about discussing on these live streams, and hopefully some days we'll have a conversation about, is we are in this interesting moment where we're seeing sort of a flourishing of these tools and platforms for independent publishing in ways that we really haven't seen. Maybe like WordPress coming along decades ago was probably, the closest thing that we've had to the proliferation of, platforms like Ghost and Substack right now. And it's really exciting to see with Ghost, moving to Ghost from Substack, all of sort of the new tools and capabilities and the autonomy and control that you're going to be able to have. So I'm just really excited, that not only that we'll be able to bring this to our readers, but also that independent journalists like ourselves are, finally seeing tools and support like this after so many years of just duct taping things together and spending all this money on a developer because you can't do anything on your own. And, no shade to developers or anything like that. It's important work. But anyway, I'm really excited. We'll have that link to share with people as soon as the site is ready. And in the meantime, thank you all for joining us. Just a quick reminder again to follow us wherever you're watching so that you can keep up with the show and keep up with our reporting. And if you like our work, you can contribute at shadowproof.com/donate. And that's it. So thanks everybody for joining us, and we will talk to you in a couple weeks.